I was 50 years old when I finally traveled to Georgia to find my husband. 50 years old, standing on a sagging porch in Brunswick with a suitcase I'd packed in fury and desperation, about to have my entire life ripped apart by one sentence. 23 years of marriage, and I'd never met his family, never seen where he grew up, never walked through the rooms where he supposedly spent his childhood, never questioned why he always went alone to visit his people down south, while I stayed in Chicago, working double shifts at the hospital, waiting by the phone, believing every word that came out of his mouth. 23 years of mom is not feeling well enough for company. 23 years of the house is too small for visitors. 23 years of next time, baby, I promise. He left on a Tuesday in March, kissed my cheek at the door like he'd done 1,000 times before, and said he'd be back in 2 weeks. Maybe less. His mama had taken a bad turn. He said he needed to go check on her, hold down the fort while he was gone. That was 8 months ago. 8 months of unanswered calls. 8 months of excuses dying on my tongue because there was nobody there to hear them. 8 months of sleeping in a bed that felt bigger and colder every night, wondering if my husband was alive or dead or just gone. So I got on a Greyhound bus with an address I'd found in an old envelope in the back of his sock drawer, and I rode 13 hours through the night to find out which one it was. And when I finally showed up at his mama's house in Brunswick, 714 Oleander Street, yellow paint peeling like old skin, standing on that porch with my suitcase and my questions and my rage barely held together by pride, the old woman who answered the door looked at me like I was a ghost. Actually, no. She looked at me like she'd seen one. Darius, she whispered, her hand going to her throat. Baby, Darius been dead since 2003. The heat pressed down on me. Georgia heat, thick and wet, making it hard to breathe. Or maybe that was just the world ending. Hard to tell the difference. Excuse me? I heard myself say. My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from someone else's body. Darius Thornwell, she said, and her eyes were filling with tears. My son. He died 19 years ago. Who are you? I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'm his wife. I finally managed. I'm Celestine. We've been married for 23 years. The old woman's face did something complicated then. Shock melting into confusion, confusion hardening into something that looked almost like pity. She reached out like she wanted to steady me, but I stepped back. Oh, baby, she breathed. Oh, sweet Jesus, you better come inside. Trust me when I tell you, that was just the beginning. Before we get into this, let me just say, if you've ever felt like you didn't know the person sleeping next to you, if you've ever ignored that small voice telling you something ain't right, you're going to want to hear this. Hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you see everything. And please comment below if you've ever had your whole life turned upside down by one sentence. Because I need to know I'm not alone in this. My name is Celestine. Celestine Parker. Well, that's what I thought my name was. I'm 50 years old. I worked as a medical billing specialist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and for 23 years, I was married to a man I thought I knew, a man named Darius Thornwell. Let me tell you who I really am. I'm the woman who cooked Sunday dinner every week for a man who had a whole other life. I'm the woman who pressed his shirts while he packed his bags for trips down south to see his sick mama. I'm the woman who believed every word, every excuse, every late-night phone call he took in the bathroom with the door closed. I'm also the woman who figured it out. And I'm the woman who made them all pay for what they did to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, back when I was young and stupid and in love. I met Darius in 1999 at a Juneteenth celebration in Washington Park. Let me paint you the picture. It was hot that day, the kind of Chicago summer heat that makes the air shimmer over the pavement. The park was packed, families spread out on blankets, kids running through the splash pad, someone's uncle manning a grill that was sending up smoke signals of ribs and hot links. Music was pouring from speakers someone had set up, old school R&B mixing with the laughter and the shouts and the general noise of black folks celebrating freedom the way we do best, together, loud, and with plenty of food. I was 27, working as a medical billing clerk at Northwestern Memorial, living in a studio apartment in Pilsen that I could barely afford. My mama had passed 2 years before from diabetes complications, and my daddy had been gone since I was 12. I was alone in the world in a way that felt like a weight I carried everywhere. And then this man walked up to me, holding a plate of ribs I didn't ask for, smiling like he knew something I didn't. He was fine. Let me be clear about that. 6 feet tall, skin the color of warm honey, deep-set eyes that seemed to look right through you. He wore a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, showing off forearms that made me forget, just for a second, that I was trying to be sensible. "You look like you're searching for something," he said, handing me the plate. I tried to play it cool. "Maybe I am." He smiled wider. "Well, maybe I'm what you've been looking for." Corny, right? Sounds like a line from a bad romance movie. But standing there in the summer heat with music playing and people laughing, and this beautiful man looking at me like I was the only person in the park, it felt like fate. We talked for 3 hours. He told me his name was Darius Thornwell, that he'd just moved to Chicago from Georgia for a graduate program in engineering at IIT. He was smart, talked about thermodynamics and systems theory in a way that made it sound interesting instead of boring. He was funny, had me laughing so hard I nearly choked on a rib. He was attentive, asked about my work, my life, what I wanted for my future. Really listened to my answers instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. He was perfect. Looking back now, I can see that was the first red flag. Nobody's that perfect. Perfect is just another word for practiced. We started dating that same week. He'd take me to dinner at little restaurants in Hyde Park, walk with me along the lakefront, hold my hand while we talked about everything and nothing. Within a month, I was in love. Within 3 months, I'd started to notice the little things that didn't quite add up, like how he never wanted me to come to his apartment, always said it was too messy, too small, not fit for company. We'd always go to my place instead. Like how he never talked about his family beyond basic facts. Mama's name was Violet. She lived in Brunswick. She had health problems. That was it. No stories about growing up, no funny anecdotes, no mentions of cousins or aunts or childhood friends. Like how he'd sometimes look at me with this expression I couldn't quite read, part guilt, part sadness, part something else I didn't have a name for. But I ignored all of it. I was lonely and in love, and those two things together can make a woman blind. 6 months after we met, he proposed. We were at Navy Pier, walking along the water, and he got down on one knee right there by the Ferris wheel and asked me to marry him. I said yes before he'd even finished the question. We got married at the courthouse 2 weeks later. Small ceremony, just us and 2 witnesses he brought, co-workers from school, he said, though I'd never met them before. I wanted to invite a few friends from work, but he said it would be more romantic if it was just us, more intimate. I should have invited my friends anyway, should have insisted, should have stood my ground, but I didn't. I wanted to make him happy, wanted to be the kind of wife who went along, who didn't cause problems, who understood when things had to be a certain way. I wanted to be chosen, and I was willing to make myself smaller to make sure I stayed chosen. That was my first mistake. It wouldn't be my last. After the wedding, I brought up meeting his family. Soon he said, "Mama's not doing well right now. She gets overwhelmed easy. But soon, I promise." A year went by, then 2, then 5. Every time I brought it up, he had a reason we couldn't go. Mama was sick. Mama was in the hospital. Mama was recovering. The house needed repairs. Money was tight. Work was busy. Next month, baby. Next year, for sure. I stopped asking around year 10. By then, it felt like a sore spot between us, something that made him tense when I brought it up. So I let it go. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that some men just aren't close with their families. I told myself a lot of lies to make the truth easier to live with. But here's the thing about lies. They need maintenance. They need you to keep not asking questions, keep not paying attention, keep not trusting your gut when it tells you something ain't right. And I was real good at maintenance, real good at smoothing things over, at making excuses, at believing what I wanted to believe instead of what the evidence was showing me. 23 years of maintenance, 23 years of lies I helped him tell by not calling them what they were. 23 years of being a good wife to a man who didn't exist. Here's what I'm telling you, and I need you young women especially to hear this. When a man keeps you away from his family, when he builds a wall between his past and his present, that wall is there for a reason. And it ain't to protect you. It's to protect his lies. I learned that lesson 8 months too late, or maybe 23 years too late, depending on how you count it. March 15th, 2022. That was the last time I saw the man I thought was my husband. I remember it was a Tuesday because Tuesdays were trash day, and I'd been dragging the bins to the curb when he came into the kitchen. He was already dressed, had his overnight bag packed, and sitting by the door. I remember thinking it was strange that he'd packed without me noticing, without the usual ritual of me helping him fold his shirts, checking that he had his phone charger, reminding him to take his blood pressure medication. He kissed my cheek, dry lips, no warmth, the kiss of a man going through motions, and said, "Mama's taken a turn. I need to go down there for a couple weeks, maybe less. Hold down the fort, Seal." Seal. He always called me that. Made it sound like I was some kind of fortress instead of a woman. Made it sound like my whole purpose was to stand strong while he did whatever he wanted. "You want me to come with you this time?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I'd been asking that question for 23 years. It was like a script we performed. "Nah, baby, Mama gets overwhelmed easy with new people. Plus, you can't take off work right now with that big audit coming up." He was right about the audit. I was lead billing specialist for our department by then, and we had state reviewers coming in to examine 5 years of Medicare claims. I'd been preparing for months, couldn't just walk away from it. But still, 23 years, and I'd never met the woman who'd raised this man. Never heard her voice. Never seen a photograph of the two of them together. Shouldn't that have told me something? "When will you be back?" I asked, pouring coffee. I didn't want just to have something to do with my hands. 2 weeks tops. "I'll call you when I get there. Let you know how she's doing." He picked up his bag. Didn't look back. Didn't say he loved me. Just walked out the door like he was going to the grocery store instead of disappearing from my life forever. I stood at the window and watched him drive away in his Honda Accord, 10 years old, but still running good because I'd made sure he kept up with the maintenance. Watched until the car turned the corner and vanished. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I'd see him as my husband. The next time I saw him, he'd be someone else entirely. The first week, I didn't worry. I was busy with the audit, working 12-hour days, coming home exhausted and falling into bed. I'd check my phone before sleeping, see no missed calls, and think he's probably dealing with a lot down there. He'll call tomorrow. The second week, I started calling him. His phone went straight to voicemail every time, that generic automated voice saying, "The subscriber you are trying to reach is not available." I left messages, cheerful at first, then concerned, then annoyed. "Hey, baby, just checking in. Hope your mama's doing better. Call me when you get a chance. Darius, it's been over a week. I'm starting to worry. Please call me back. I don't know what's going on, but this isn't okay. You need to call me. Now. Nothing. Silence. Like shouting into a void. The third week, I tried the landline number he'd given me years ago. The one he said was his mama's house phone. I'd only called it once or twice in all those years. He always said cell phones made his mama nervous, that she didn't like talking on the phone unless it was an emergency. The line was disconnected, had been for months, according to the automated message. That's when the fear really set in. The cold, creeping kind that starts in your stomach and spreads through your whole body until even your fingertips feel numb. What if something happened to him? What if he got in an accident on the drive down? What if he had a heart attack, a stroke, something sudden? What if he was lying in some Georgia hospital, unconscious, and nobody knew to call me because I'd never met his family, never given them my number, never existed in that part of his life? Or, and this thought was worse somehow, what if he just left? What if he decided after 23 years that he was done, that he wanted out, and the easiest way was to just drive away and never come back? By week 6, I'd called every hospital in Brunswick. No patient by the name of Darius Thornwell. No John Does matching his description. Nothing. I'd filed a missing person report with the Chicago police. They took my information, looked at me with that expression cops get when they're dealing with a situation they've seen 100 times before, and told me that unless there was evidence of foul play, there wasn't much they could do. He was a grown man. He had a right to leave if he wanted to, but his mama's sick, I said. He went to take care of her. Do you have contact information for the mother? The officer asked. The phone number's disconnected. Do you have an address? I didn't. Not then. Not one I was sure of. Anyway, just a general sense that he was from Brunswick, Georgia, and a vague memory of him mentioning a street name once or twice that I couldn't quite recall. The officer was sympathetic, but firm. Look, ma'am, men leave their wives every day. I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's the truth. He probably just needed space, or he's going through something. Give it a few more weeks. He'll probably turn up. I left the police station feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. Like I was a cliché. The abandoned wife who couldn't see the signs. The woman everyone pitied, but I wasn't going to be that woman. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for him to decide whether or not I was worth coming back to. So I went home and I started searching. I went through every drawer, every closet, every box in our basement. I found old tax returns with addresses that turned out to be fake. I found birthday cards signed Love, Mama in handwriting I didn't recognize. I found a photograph, just one, of him as a child, standing in front of a yellow house with an old woman's hand on his shoulder. The woman's face was cut off by the edge of the frame. And finally, in the back of his sock drawer, underneath pairs he never wore, I found an envelope, old, yellowed, postmarked from 2004. Return address, 714 Oleander Street, Brunswick, Georgia. I held that envelope like it was made of gold, like it was the answer to everything. Maybe it was. By week 12, I'd made my decision. I took 2 weeks off work, personal leave. I told my supervisor, family emergency. I packed a suitcase with enough clothes for a week. I went to the bank and withdrew $2,000 in cash, just in case. And then I went online and bought a one-way ticket on the Greyhound to Brunswick, Georgia. If he wasn't going to come home to me, I was going to go find him. What I found instead was the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, was so much worse than anything I'd imagined. August 2022. For months since I'd last seen Darius. 5 months since I'd heard his voice. I took 2 weeks off work, told my supervisor it was a family emergency, which wasn't exactly a lie. Then I packed a suitcase, printed out the address from an old envelope I'd found in his dresser drawer, return address from Brunswick, Georgia, and I got on that Greyhound bus heading south. 13 hours from Chicago to Brunswick. 13 hours to think about what I was going to say when I found him. 13 hours to imagine the worst. Was he sick? Dead? Had he left me for another woman? Did he have a whole other family down there? Every scenario ran through my mind like a movie I couldn't turn off. The bus pulled into Brunswick just after dawn. Hot already, that thick Georgia heat that sits on your skin like a wet blanket. I got a cab to the address, 714 Oleander Street, and watched the neighborhoods change from the Greyhound station to the outskirts of town. Nicer houses gave way to smaller ones, paint peeling, yards overgrown. The cab driver, an older black man with gray in his beard, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You visiting family?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. "Thornwell Place," he muttered, reading the address I'd given him. "Ain't been nobody there in years, far as I know. Old Miss Violet passed back in, must have been 10 years ago now." My stomach dropped. Violet Thornwell. "Yes, ma'am. Sweet lady. Had them twin boys. Lost one of them young, though. Terrible thing." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The cab kept moving, carrying me toward answers I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. The house was smaller than I'd imagined. One story, yellow paint faded to almost white, shutters hanging crooked. The yard was overgrown, but someone had been maintaining it enough to keep the city from complaining. Grass cut, weeds pulled from the walkway. I paid the driver and stood there on the sidewalk with my suitcase, staring at this house that should have been familiar. This house where my husband supposedly grew up. This house I'd never seen before in my life. The front door opened before I could knock. A woman stepped out onto the porch. She was maybe 70, thin as a rail, wearing a house dress and slippers. Her hair was gray, pulled back in a bun, and her face. I nearly dropped my suitcase. She had Darius's eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious. "I'm looking for Darius Thornwell," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. "I'm his wife." The woman's hand went to her throat. She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her face do something complicated. Shock, then confusion, then something that looked almost like pity. "Wife," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. Celestine. We've been married 23 years. He came down here in March to take care of his mama, and I haven't heard from him since. I need to know, is he here? Is he okay?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head slowly. "Baby," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "Darius been dead since 2003. Pause right here. I need you to really take that in. 23 years. I need you to understand what that moment felt like, standing there in the heat, suitcase in hand, while a stranger tells you your husband has been dead for 19 years. If you're still with me, hit that like button and stay tuned, because what I found out next, trust me, you won't believe it. I don't remember sitting down, but I must have, because next thing I knew I was on that porch in an old wicker chair that creaked under my weight, and the woman, Miss Loretta, she said her name was pressing a glass of sweet tea into my hands. The glass was slick with condensation, cold against my palms. I stared at it like I'd never seen a glass before. "Drink that," she said gently. "You look like you're about to fall out." My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the glass. Tea sloshed over the rim, dripping onto my lap. I didn't care. Couldn't care. My entire brain had gone blank, white noise where thoughts should be. "I don't understand," I finally managed to say. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "If Darius is dead, then who? Who have I been married to?" Miss Loretta sat down in the chair next to me. She looked old in the afternoon light, older than her years. Her face was lined with deep creases, the kind that come from grief, not just time. She wore a simple house dress, faded blue cotton, and slippers that had seen better days. Her hands, when she reached over to steady my tea glass, were rough and worn. "Damon," she said quietly, like the name itself was painful to speak. "You've been married to Damon." "Who's Damon?" "Darius's twin brother." The world tilted sideways. I felt the porch shift under me. Or maybe it was just my sense of reality finally giving way. Twin brother. 23 years, and he'd never mentioned a twin brother. Never mentioned any brother at all. Never said, "Hey, by the way, I had a twin who looked exactly like me." How do you keep that secret? How do you hide an entire person, an entire other half of yourself for over 2 decades? "I need you to explain," I said. My voice was steady now, cold. All the shock was crystallizing into something harder, sharper. Anger, maybe, or just the refusal to accept one more lie. "I need you to explain everything. From the beginning." Miss Loretta nodded slowly. She took a sip of her own tea. She'd brought out 2 glasses. I realized like she'd been expecting this conversation for years, and gathered herself. When she spoke, her voice was thick with old grief. "The boys were born on November 3rd, 1969, she began. 2 minutes apart, Darius first, then Damon. Doctor said I was only having 1 baby. So when that second boy came out, it was like a miracle and a curse all at once. We couldn't afford 1 baby, let alone 2. But there they were." She smiled a little, remembering. They were identical. I mean, truly identical. Same weight, same length, same little button noses. The nurses had to put different colored bracelets on them just so I could tell them apart in the beginning. But then I learned their differences. Darius was quieter, more thoughtful. He'd study you with these serious eyes before he'd smile. Damon was louder, quicker to cry, quicker to laugh. And Darius had this birthmark on his left shoulder blade, shaped like a quarter moon. Damon didn't. I knew that birthmark. I'd traced it with my fingers 1,000 times in the dark, in the quiet moments before sleep. Or had I? Was it even there? Or had I just believed it was because that's what I'd been told to see? As they grew up, they were inseparable, Miss Loretta continued. Did everything together. Shared a bedroom. Shared clothes. Shared friends. You'd see one, you'd see the other. People in town used to call them the Thornwell boys, like they were one person with 4 legs. She paused, her jaw tightening. But as they got older, the differences started to show. Darius was smart, real smart, made honor roll. Every year, won awards for math and science. Teachers loved him. He had plans. Wanted to be an engineer, wanted to go to college, wanted to get out of Brunswick and make something of himself. And Damon? I asked. Miss Loretta's expression darkened. Damon was smart too, don't get me wrong. But he was angry. At what? I never could figure out exactly. Maybe at being the second-born, the afterthought. Maybe at not having anything that was just his. Maybe at life in general. He started running with a bad crowd in high school, skipping school, getting into fights, stealing cars. I tried everything, grounding him, talking to him, praying over him. Nothing worked. She took another sip of tea, her hands trembling slightly. When they turned 18, Darius got a full scholarship to Georgia, Southern. Not his first choice. He'd applied to schools up north, bigger programs. But it was a start. He was going to study engineering, then transfer after 2 years to somewhere better. And Damon dropped out of high school 3 months before graduation. Started dealing drugs for this crew out of Jacksonville. I begged him not to, told him he was better than that, told him he was going to end up dead or in prison. He just laughed at me, said at least he'd be doing something real instead of wasting his time on dreams that would never come true. Miss Loretta's voice cracked. She set down her tea glass and pressed her hands to her face. I failed him, she whispered. I tried so hard to raise them right, both of them. But I failed Damon. And because I failed him, Darius paid the price. What happened? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Didn't want to hear how the man whose name I'd been carrying for 23 years had died. Miss Loretta lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. Not anymore. I think she'd cried all her tears out years ago. 2003, she said. Summer. Darius had just finished his second year at Georgia Southern. He'd been accepted for transfer to IIT in Chicago, Illinois Institute of Technology. Full scholarship. It was everything he'd been working for. He was supposed to leave in August. She took a shaky breath. Damon had gotten himself into trouble. He owed money to some bad people, drug dealers, loan sharks, I don't know exactly. Thousands of dollars. They gave him a deadline to pay it back. And when he couldn't, they came looking for him. But they found Darius instead. I said quietly. Miss Loretta nodded. The boys looked exactly alike. Exactly. And Darius was wearing Damon's jacket that night. They still shared clothes sometimes, even though they weren't close anymore. He was at JB's barbecue, picking up dinner for me. I'd been working double shifts at the hospital, and he was trying to help out. She closed her eyes. They grabbed him in the parking lot, beat him to death with tire irons, left him there like trash. By the time someone found him and called the police, he'd been dead for hours. The tea in my glass had gone warm. I set it down carefully on the porch railing, my hands steadier now. Shock does that sometimes, gives you this strange calm in the eye of the storm. Where was Damon? Gone, Miss Loretta said bitterly. Ran the moment he heard what happened. Didn't even come to the funeral. I had to bury my baby boy alone, while his brother, his identical brother, was out there somewhere, living free. But he came back, I said, 6 months later. Showed up here late one night, crying, saying he was sorry, saying he never meant for any of it to happen. Said he'd been up in Chicago. Said he'd taken Darius's scholarship, his acceptance letter, everything. Said he was living as Darius now, going to IIT as Darius. Had Darius's apartment, Darius's student ID, Darius's whole life. And you let him, I said. It wasn't a question. Miss Loretta's face crumpled. I was weak, she whispered. God help me, I was weak. I'd lost one son. I couldn't bear to lose the other, even if he didn't deserve my mercy. He said if I told anybody, if I exposed him, he'd disappear again, and I'd never know if he was alive or dead. He said at least this way, one of my boys got to live the life they deserved. Darius deserved that life. I said coldly, not Damon. I know. I told him that. Told him he was wrong. Told him he needed to come home, face what he'd done, make things right. But he wouldn't listen, and I was too weak to turn him in, too weak to lose both my boys. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw the weight of all those years in her eyes. So I let him do it. I let him steal his brother's life, and I've been living with that shame ever since. And then one day, years later, he called and told me he'd met someone. A good woman, he said. Someone kind and patient. Someone who deserved better than him. Me, I said flatly. You. And I wanted to warn you, wanted to tell you the truth, but I didn't even know your last name, where you lived, anything. All I knew was that my son's murder was living a lie, and an innocent woman was caught up in it. When did he mention me by name? Not until years later. Maybe 2005, 2006. He'd call every few months, always from different numbers. Sometimes he'd send money, guilt money, I always thought. He'd ask about the house, about the neighborhood, but he never asked about me. Never said he was sorry for what he'd done to his brother. Just talked like he was Darius, like he'd earned that life. Miss Loretta's voice hardened. I asked him, Once when he was going to tell you the truth. Asked him if you knew you were married to an imposter. He got angry, said it was none of my business, said I'd given up the right to judge him when I didn't turn him in. Then he hung up. That was about 2 years ago. Ain't heard from him since. I sat there for a long moment, letting it all sink in. The lies, the theft, the murder that had made it all possible. My husband, the man I'd loved, trusted, built a life with, was a murderer. Or, at least, his brother's death was on his hands. And I'd never known, never even suspected. I need to see the grave, I said, finally. I need to see where Darius is buried. Miss Loretta nodded. I'll take you there. But first, there's something else you need to know. I almost laughed. What else could there possibly be? She reached into the pocket of her house dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The paper was worn, like it had been handled many times. This came in the mail 3 days ago, she said, handing it to me. From Damon. The cemetery was 10 minutes away by cab. Miss Loretta came with me, silent in the back seat. The cab driver, a different one this time, didn't ask questions. Magnolia Hill Cemetery sat on a gentle slope overlooking a creek. Old live oaks draped with Spanish moss. Headstones dating back to the 1800s. Pretty, in a sad kind of way. Miss Loretta led me to a plot in the newer section. The headstone was simple gray granite. Darius James Thornwell, 1969 to 2003. Beloved son, gone too soon. I stared at that stone for a long time, stared at the dates. Darius would have been 34 when he died. I'd met Damon, in 1999, for years before the real Darius died, which meant I'd been married to Damon the whole time, which meant everything was a lie. The man I married, the man I loved, the man I gave 23 years of my life to, he never existed. He was a ghost wearing a dead man's name, living a stolen life. And I was just another prop in his elaborate disguise. There's something else you need to know, Miss Loretta said quietly. I turned to look at her. What else could there possibly be? She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This came in the mail 3 days ago, addressed to me, but it's about you. I unfolded the paper. It was a letter, handwritten in cramped, urgent script. Mama. If a woman named Celestine ever shows up looking for Darius, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her she deserved better. Tell her about Darius, about what I did, about all of it. Tell her I've got cancer. Stage 4. Doctors say I got maybe 3 months. Tell her there's money in the account under her name at First National Bank on Michigan Avenue. Everything I got, it's hers. It ain't enough, but it's something. And tell her about the tradition. She'll need to know about the tradition. I read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. What tradition? I asked. Miss Loretta's face was grave. It's an old custom from way back. If a married man dies, his widow can choose to marry his brother to keep the family name, keep the property, keep everything in the bloodline. It's called levirate marriage. Ain't common anymore, but some of the old families still honor it. I stared at her. You're telling me that if Damon dies, I'm supposed to marry. What? Is there another brother I don't know about? No, Miss Loretta said. Just the twins. But according to the tradition and the law, you're technically Darius's widow now. You were married to a man using Darius's name, living Darius's life. In the eyes of our family tradition, you're entitled to marry the surviving brother. Damon, I said slowly, is the surviving brother. Yes. So I'm already married to him. Not legally. You married him under Darius's name. That marriage ain't valid. My head was spinning. This is insane. It's tradition, Miss Loretta said. And tradition says you got a choice to make. I didn't go back to Chicago right away. I stayed in Brunswick for 3 days, staying at a Comfort Inn off I-95, trying to process everything, trying to figure out what to do. The bank account was real. I went to First National, spoke to a manager, showed my ID. There was an account in Celestine Parker's name with $247,000 in it. 23 years of guilt money, apparently. Small price for stealing someone's entire life. I sat in that bank for an hour, staring at the balance on the printout they gave me. Blood money. That's what this was. But it was also my money, my compensation for 23 years of lies. And I'd earned every penny of it by being faithful, being patient, being the kind of wife he never deserved. Miss Loretta called me on the third day. "He's here," she said. "Damon, he came home." Before we continue, I want you to think about what you would do in this situation. Would you confront him? Walk away? Make him pay? Drop a comment and let me know, because what I decided to do, well, it's not what you'd expect. Make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to take a turn. I walked into Miss Loretta's house like I owned it, because in a way, according to that ridiculous tradition, I guess I did. He was sitting in the living room, thinner than I remembered, grayer, sick-looking, but still him. Still the man I'd woken up next to for 23 years. Still Damon. He looked up when I walked in, and I watched his face cycle through emotions: surprise, fear, resignation. "Seal," he said. "Don't." I cut him off. "Don't you dare call me that." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." I sat down in the chair across from him. Miss Loretta had made herself scarce, gone into the kitchen to give us privacy we didn't deserve. "How long have you known you were dying?" I asked. 6 months. Maybe 7. "Is that why you left?" "Part of it. I couldn't let you watch me die as him. As Darius. I couldn't keep lying to you while my body broke down. So I left. Figured I'd come home, die here, and you'd just think I abandoned you. Better than the truth." "Better for who?" He didn't answer. "You stole your brother's life," I said. "You let me fall in love with a ghost. You married me under a dead man's name. You kept me away from everyone who knew the truth. For 23 years, Damon. 23 years of my life, based on a lie. I know. I loved you," I said, and my voice cracked on it. "I loved you so much. I would have loved you anyway, whoever you were. But you didn't give me that choice." Tears were running down his face now. "I know." "Why?" I asked. "Why do all this? Why not just be yourself?" "Because myself ain't worth loving," he said quietly. "Myself is the man who got his brother killed. Myself is a coward and a thief and a liar. But Darius was good. Darius was smart and kind and had a future. So I became him. And when I met you, you looked at me like I was worth something. Like I was the kind of man Darius would have been. I couldn't give that up. So you took my choice away." "Yes." "You stole my life too." "Yes." I sat there for a long moment, looking at this man I thought I knew, this stranger wearing a familiar face. Miss Loretta told me about the tradition. I said. He looked up, surprised. She said, "I'm technically Darius's widow." Said I could choose to marry the surviving brother. That would be you. "Seal, Celestine, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," I said, "but here's what's going to happen. You're going to do exactly what I say, or I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. I'll go to the police. I'll go to the IRS. I'll tell them about the identity fraud, the stolen scholarship. All of it. You'll die in prison instead of in peace." His jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "I want what I'm owed." Here's what I told him. We were going to do this right. Legal. Clean. First, he was going to come back to Chicago with me. We were going to go to a lawyer, and he was going to confess everything. Identity fraud, marriage fraud, all of it. But we were going to spin it a specific way. He was dying. He was making amends. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of. Second, we were going to annul the marriage to Darius. It was fraudulent anyway, never legally valid. But we were going to make sure I got everything. The house we bought together, in Darius's name, of course, the cars, the bank accounts, all of it. 23 years of community property signed over to me. Third, and this is where it got interesting, we were going to get married again. Legally this time, under his real name, Damon Thornwell and Celestine Parker. A proper marriage, witnessed, and notarized. Why? He asked when I laid it out for him. Why marry me again if you hate me? Because, I said calmly, when you die in 3 months or however long you've got, I want to be your legal widow. I want the Social Security survivor benefits. I want the life insurance policy I know you've got through your job. I want every single thing that's coming to me as your wife. I leaned forward. You stole 23 years from me, Damon. I'm taking it all back. With interest. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You've gotten hard, he said. You made me this way. He thought about it for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll do it. One more thing, I said. This house. Your mama's house. You're going to deed it to me too. Miss Loretta can live here as long as she wants, but when she's gone, it's mine. That's fair. I finished. That's fair. After what your family did to me, it's more than fair. He looked at Miss Loretta, who'd come back into the room. She nodded slowly. She's right, Damon. It's the least we can do. Fine, he said. Fine. It's yours. I stood up. We leave for Chicago tomorrow. Pack light. You won't need much where you're going. The trip back to Chicago was silent. 13 hours on that Greyhound bus. Same route I'd taken to get there. But everything was different now. Damon slept most of the way. Or pretended to sleep. Hard to tell. He was thinner than I remembered, his face gaunt, skin gray. The cancer was eating him from the inside out, and you could see it in every hollow of his cheeks, every prominent bone in his wrists. I sat next to the window and watched the landscape change. Georgia pines giving way to Tennessee hills, Tennessee to Kentucky flatlands, Kentucky to Illinois cornfields. The same view I'd seen on the way down, but I was seeing it with different eyes now. I thought about the woman I'd been when I left Chicago. Confused, hurt, desperate for answers. That woman felt like a stranger to me now. Someone soft, someone breakable. I wasn't that woman anymore. Somewhere between Brunswick and Chicago, between discovering my husband was a lie and deciding exactly how much I was going to make him pay for it, I'd become someone harder, clearer, someone who knew exactly what she was worth and wasn't going to accept anything less. We pulled into the Chicago Greyhound station just after dawn on a Tuesday. Same day of the week he'd left, different person coming back. I'd called Veronica Chun before we left Georgia. The lawyer I'd found through an online search, a woman who specialized in complex family law cases. Fraud, identity theft, estate planning. She'd heard worse stories than mine. She told me on the phone. Not much worse, but worse. Bring him in as soon as you get back, she'd said. And bring every document you have, marriage certificate, tax returns, deeds, bank statements, everything. We're going to need to move fast if he's only got a few months. I'd packed everything. 23 years of paperwork stuffed into a banker's box I'd found in Miss Loretta's garage. Our whole life together reduced to documents and signatures and lies. We took a cab from the station to Veronica's office in the Loop. Damon could barely walk by then. The bus ride had worn him out, left him weak and trembling. I helped him out of the cab, my hand under his elbow, holding him up. People passing by probably thought I was a good wife, helping my sick husband. They couldn't know the truth. couldn't know that every step I helped him take was a debt being paid back, a piece of what he owed me. Veronica Chun was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, and no nonsense. She took one look at Damon and had her assistant bring him water and a chair. Then she turned to me. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine," I said, and I was. Or, at least, I was as fine as someone could be after their entire life turned out to be a lie. We spent 3 hours in her office that day. Damon confessed everything: the identity theft, the fraud, the stolen scholarship, the murder he'd run from. Veronica recorded it all, took notes in her precise handwriting, asked questions that made him squirm. "Why did you do it?" she asked at one point. Damon looked at his hands. "Because I wanted to be him," he said quietly. "Darius was everything I wasn't. Good, smart, deserving of a better life. I thought if I became him, I could be those things too." "And Mrs. Parker?" Veronica asked, looking at me. "Did you ever plan to tell her the truth?" "Every day," Damon said. "Every single day I thought about telling her. But the longer it went on, the harder it got. And I loved her. I didn't want to lose her." "So you lied to her for 23 years instead?" "Yes." Veronica closed her notebook. "We have a lot of work to do. The annulment came through in 2 weeks. Our marriage to Darius Thornwell was declared null and void. It had never been legal in the first place, a marriage built on a false identity. But first, we had to untangle everything. The house we'd bought together had been in Darius's name. Damon had used his brother's stolen identity to get the mortgage, the deed, everything. Veronica argued that since I'd been making half the payments for 23 years, believing in good faith that I was married, I was entitled to the full equity. The judge agreed. The house became mine, free and clear. The cars, the bank accounts, the modest 401k Damon had built up working as an engineer for 20 years, all of it transferred to my name. And then, 2 weeks after we returned to Chicago, Damon and I got married again. For real this time. In a judge's chambers with 2 court-appointed witnesses who looked bored and tired. No ceremony, no flowers, no joy, just paperwork and signatures, and me becoming Mrs. Damon Thornwell, legally, officially, finally. He could barely stand by then. The cancer had progressed rapidly, spreading to his bones, his liver, his lungs. He was gray-skinned and hollow-eyed. And when he signed his name on the marriage certificate, his hand shook so badly he could barely write. "Why are you doing this?" he asked me that night back at the house. Our house now, legally mine, though the marriage made it ours again in the eyes of the law. We were in the bedroom, our bedroom, though I'd been sleeping in the guest room since we got back. He was lying in bed, too weak to sit up for long. I was sitting in a chair I'd pulled up next to the bed, close enough to hear him, but not close enough to touch. "I told you why?" I said calmly. "No," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I mean, really, why not just take the money and leave? Why marry me again? Why go through all this?" I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd lied to me, used me, stolen my youth and my trust. This dying stranger wearing a familiar face. Because I said slowly, carefully, making sure he understood every word, "I need you to know that I won. I need you to die knowing that in the end, I'm the one who came out on top. You took everything from me, Damon. I'm taking it all back. With interest." His eyes filled with tears. "You deserve that. I know." He lasted 8 more weeks after that. 8 weeks of slow decline, of his body breaking down piece by piece. 8 weeks of me taking care of him with the same quiet efficiency I'd shown for 23 years, but with a different purpose now. I fed him when he couldn't feed himself anymore, spooned soup into his mouth, wiped his chin when it dribbled, held water to his lips when he was too weak to hold the glass. I changed his sheets when he was too sick to get up, too weak to make it to the bathroom. I cleaned him, washed him, dressed him in clean pajamas. I gave him his medications on schedule, pain pills for the bone aches, anti-nausea pills for the chemo. He'd stopped taking because it wasn't working anymore, sleeping pills for the nights when the pain was too bad to rest. I sat with him during the long hours when he couldn't sleep, when all he could do was lie there and cry softly, so softly, like he was afraid to disturb me. I did it all. Every intimate, exhausting task, every moment of care and attention. But I did it differently than I would have before. Before, when I thought I was married to Darius, I would have done it out of love, out of that deep well of devotion that makes you want to ease someone's suffering, to be their comfort in the darkness. Now, I did it as a reminder. Every pill I handed him, every meal I prepared, every time I helped him to the bathroom or changed his soiled sheets, it was a debt being paid back. You owe me this, I thought every time. You owe me every moment of care I give you. You owe me everything. Sometimes, late at night when the pain medication made him loose and honest, he'd try to talk about the old days. Remember when we went to Navy Pier? He'd say, his voice thin and dreamy. Remember watching the fireworks on the 4th of July, you leaning against me, saying you'd never been happier? I'd remember. Of course, I'd remember. That had been our 3rd anniversary. We'd eaten too much, drunk too much, laughed until our sides hurt. It had been a perfect day. But I wouldn't remember it with him. That wasn't you, I'd say quietly. That was Darius. Or, at least, that's who I thought you were. He'd close his eyes then, tears leaking out from under his lids. Remember our first Christmas? He'd try again another night. You made a turkey that was so dry we could barely eat it, and I said it was delicious anyway. I'd remember that too. I'd been so embarrassed, had nearly cried over that ruined bird. And he'd held me and told me it was perfect, had eaten every bite just to make me feel better. But I wouldn't remember it with him. Couldn't. Those memories belonged to a different woman, a woman who'd loved a man who never existed. I don't want to talk about the past. I'd say the past was a lie. Toward the end, he stopped trying to reminisce. He just lay there, breathing slowly, in and out, each breath a little shallower than the last. The hospice nurse came twice a day, a kind woman named Patricia, who spoke in soft tones and never asked questions about why I seemed so calm, so unmoved by what was happening. "You're very strong," she said to me once. "I have to be," I replied. 3 days before he died, he woke up in the middle of the night and found me sitting in the chair next to his bed. I'd been sleeping there most nights by then, not because I wanted to be close to him, but because I needed to be there when it happened, needed to witness the final payment. "Seal," he whispered. I opened my eyes. "What?" "I'm sorry." I'd heard him say it 100 times by then. Sorry for lying. Sorry for stealing. Sorry for being the reason his brother was dead. Sorry for ruining my life. "I know," I said. "Do you forgive me?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Could I forgive him? Should I? "No," I said finally. "I don't think I can." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. "That's fair. But I don't hate you either," I continued. "I think I'm past hate. You're just a man who made terrible choices, and now you're paying for them." "What are you then?" he asked. "If you don't hate me, if you don't forgive me, what are you?" I thought about that question for a long time. "I'm the woman who survived you," I said. Finally, he died on a Tuesday in October, just after dawn. I was sitting in my usual chair, reading a book I wasn't really seeing. He'd been asleep for most of the previous 24 hours, his breathing slow and labored, his body finally giving up. I heard him take a breath, then another, longer this time, rattling in his chest, then silence. I looked up from my book. His eyes were open, looking at me. For just a second, I saw something in them, recognition, regret, maybe even relief. "I'm sorry, Seal," he whispered, then he was gone. I sat there for a few minutes, listening to the silence. The absence of his breathing, that sound I'd lived with for 23 years, was louder than anything. Then I closed his eyes, pulled the sheet up over his face, and called Patricia, the hospice nurse. "He's gone," I told her when she answered. "I'll be right there," she said. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, and I was fine. I know some of you might be thinking I was cruel, that I should have forgiven him. But let me ask you this. If someone stole 23 years of your life, would you forgive them? Or would you make sure they paid every penny back? Comment below. And if you're still with me, hit that subscribe button because we're almost to the end, and you need to hear how this turned out. The funeral was small. Miss Loretta came up from Georgia, a few people from Damon's job. Me. We buried him next to a plot I'd already purchased for myself. Even in death, he was going to owe me. The life insurance paid out $500,000. The Social Security survivor benefits started coming in. The house was mine. The car was mine. The bank accounts were mine. I'd also found something else while going through his papers. Turns out Damon had been smart about one thing he'd been investing for years. Stocks, bonds, a rental property in Gary, Indiana. All of it in Darius's name, which meant all of it was now mine. Total assets, just over $1.2 million. Not bad for a woman who'd been married to a ghost. But here's the thing. The money wasn't the victory. The money was nice, sure. It meant I could retire early, travel, live comfortably. It meant I'd never have to depend on anyone again. But the real victory was this. I'd taken back my power. For 23 years, I'd let someone else control my narrative. I'd been the faithful wife, the patient woman, the one who waited and believed and trusted. And where did that get me? Married to a lie. But in the end, I rewrote the story. I decided how it ended. I made sure that when the dust settled, I was the one standing. Miss Loretta called me a month after the funeral. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about what you did, making him marry you again, taking care of him at the end. Some people might say that was cold. Some people might. I agreed. But I think it was mercy," she said quietly. "You could have walked away, could have left him to die alone. But you didn't. You stayed. Even after everything, you stayed." I thought about that for a moment. I didn't do it for him. I said, finally, I did it for me. I needed to see it through. I needed to watch him pay back every single day he stole from me. And did he pay it back? I looked out my window at the Chicago skyline, at the life I'd built from the ashes of my stolen years. "Every penny," I said. "It's been a year now since Damon died. I'm 51 years old, and I'm finally living the life I should have had all along. I retired from the hospital, sold the house in Chicago, too many ghosts, bought a condo in Hyde Park with a view of the lake, started traveling, places I always wanted to go but never could because Damon was always too busy or money was tight. Turns out money wasn't tight at all. He just didn't want to spend it on me. But I'm spending it now. On myself. On experiences. On the life I deserve. I also went back to school. Started taking classes at the community college. Literature, creative writing, art, history. All the things I was interested in when I was young before I met a man in a white linen shirt at a Juneteenth celebration and thought I'd found my future. My future is mine now. No one else's. I think about Damon sometimes. Wonder if he really was sorry or if he was just sorry he got caught. Wonder if he ever really loved me or if I was just another part of the disguise he wore. I'll never know for sure, and I've made peace with that. What I do know is this: I survived. More than that, I won. I took every single thing he tried to steal from me, and I claimed it back with interest. Let me tell you what I learned from all this. I learned that you can't trust someone just because you love them. Love makes you blind, but it doesn't have to make you stupid. I learned that when something feels wrong, when that little voice in your head says, "This ain't right," you need to listen. That voice is trying to save you. I learned that it's never too late to take back your power. I was 50 years old when I found out the truth. 50. Some people would say it's too late to start over at 50. But those people are wrong. I learned that dignity isn't about being quiet and patient and long-suffering. Dignity is about knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. And I learned that the best revenge isn't hurting someone back. The best revenge is taking everything they tried to steal and making it yours, making it count. I gave my youth to that marriage. I gave my trust, my faith, my loyalty. I gave 23 years to a man who wasn't even real. But the truth didn't take everything else. The truth gave me back myself. And in the end, that's the only thing that really matters. So that's my story. That's how I went from being Celestine Parker, faithful wife, to Celestine Thornwell, widow and survivor. Some of you are probably thinking I should have just walked away, taken the money, and left him to die alone. Maybe you're right. Maybe that would have been easier. But easy isn't always right. And I needed to see it through. I needed to watch him pay back every single day, every single year, every single moment he stole from me. I needed to win. And I did. If you got something from this story, if it made you think, made you feel, made you question the life you're living right now, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me your story. Because we all have stories of betrayal, of being underestimated, of having to fight for what's ours. And we all deserve to win in the end. My name is Celestine Thornwell. I'm 51 years old, and I'm finally free. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, it's never too late to take back your power. Never.